The deputy hammered the door at 6 in the morning, 3 short blows that rattled the chain on the porch swing. He had a folded paper in one hand and an apology nowhere on his face. The woman inside was already dressed because she had not slept, not really, only watched the ceiling fan spin and counted the ways a life can shrink. She walked to the door in her late husband's wool slippers. The deputy held up the eviction order, said the bank had bought the note, said she had until sundown to be off the property. Behind him, a flatbed truck idled at the curb with a winch and a man waiting to load whatever she could not carry. 81 years on this earth, and the only thing she still owned outright was a rusted Airstream trailer, parked on a strip of red dirt her father had left her in 1979. Why had he made her promise, on his deathbed, to never sell that trailer no matter how poor she got? Stay with me on this one. Her name we will get to. For now call her the woman in the wool slippers, because that is how the deputy saw her, and how the neighbors would later describe her to the reporter who came around asking questions. She did not cry on the porch. She had used up her crying 2 winters back when the pension recalculation letter came, and the number at the bottom of the page turned out to be less than the number on her property tax bill. She had borrowed against the house then. A reverse mortgage with a friendly name, and a balloon clause buried on page 19. The friendly man who sold it to her had a son in Little League and a tie with cartoon fish on it. He told her she would never lose the house. He was wrong or he was lying, and at her age the difference no longer mattered. The deputy waited on the porch while she walked back inside. The house smelled like the lemon oil she had rubbed into the banister every Saturday for 46 years. Her husband had been dead 19 years. Their son had been dead 12. There was a daughter, technically in Sacramento, who sent a card at Christmas and never picked up the phone. She had stopped expecting. Expectation, she had learned, was a kind of rent you paid on a room nobody lived in. She packed a single hard-sided suitcase. 2 changes of clothes, the photograph of her husband on the day he came home from Korea, the photograph of her son in his first Little League uniform, her father's dog tags, her mother's wedding ring, a tin of loose tea, a paperback Bible with a broken spine, and the brass key to the Airstream. She left the china. She left the wedding silver. She left the curio cabinet full of porcelain birds her sister had given her one Christmas a long time ago, when sisters still spoke. She wrote a note for the bank's clean-out crew that said please donate everything, and signed it with her initials. Then she walked back to the porch, where the deputy stood looking at his boots. He drove her himself. He was not required to. He said his own grandmother had been put out of a house in Bellingham in 1998, and he had never gotten over it, and if it was all the same to her, he would like to drop her wherever she needed to go. She said the strip of red dirt was 11 miles east of town, off the county road, past the silo with the painted owl. He nodded like he knew the place. They did not speak the rest of the way. The radio played a country song about a man who lost his dog, and then his wife, and then in the last verse found God in the produce aisle of a Piggly Wiggly. The deputy turned it off when the chorus came around the second time. The road to the property was washboard and rutted, and her teeth clacked together over every rib of dried mud. Tall pines on both sides, then a clearing, then the Airstream itself sitting on cinder blocks where her father had set it half a century ago. The trailer was the color of a tarnished nickel, and streaked with rust the color of dried blood. The aluminum skin had buckled in 3 places. A pine had fallen on the rear corner sometime in the last decade, and stove in the bathroom roof. Wasps had built a city under the awning. The tires were rotted to the rims. It looked, the deputy said gently, like nobody had been inside in 20 years. The woman said nobody had. Her father had locked it on the day. He handed her the key and made her promise. She had honored the promise. She had never once turned the brass key in the lock. The deputy helped her carry the suitcase to the door. He offered to wait while she got it open. She said, "No, son, you have done enough. You go on home to your wife." He hesitated. He said, "Ma'am, there is no power out here. No water, no nothing, are you sure?" She said her father had taught her how to make do, and her husband had taught her how to wait, and between the two of them she had a full set of tools. The deputy nodded once, touched the brim of his hat, and walked back to the cruiser. He sat there a long minute before he started the engine. She watched him go in the side mirror of the Airstream, a small white car shrinking down the rutted lane until the pines swallowed it. Then she was alone with the trailer and the brass key, and a promise 50 years old. She stood on the cinder block step and looked at the door. The handle was furred with corrosion. The lock plate had a green crust around the keyhole. She wiped it with the hem of her cardigan. She slid the key in. It would not turn. She wiggled it, withdrew it, spat on it like her father used to spit on a stuck bolt, and slid it back. The tumblers gave with a sound like a small bone breaking. The door sighed inward an inch. A breath of trapped air came out, dry and sweet, smelling of cedar shavings and something else she could not name, something almost like the inside of a piano. She stepped up. She stepped in. The interior was darker than she expected, the windows curtained with rotted gingham that had once been yellow. Dust lay on every surface in a pelt half an inch thick. A bunk to the left, a small galley to the right, a dinette at the rear that her father had upholstered himself in green vinyl now cracked into 1,000 islands. A shotgun rack above the bunk, empty. A coffee pot on the two-burner stove, the grounds fossilized in the basket. On the dinette table, dead center, a steel ammunition can painted olive drab, the lid latched shut. And beside the can, a yellowed envelope with her name written across the front in her father's blocky pencil hand. Her name was Elena. Elena Rose Whitfield, born 1944, daughter of Master Sergeant Hollis Whitfield, United States Army, 8th Cavalry Regiment, Korea. She did not pick up the envelope right away. She stood in the dust-smelling dark and looked at her name on the paper and felt the years compress like an accordion being pushed shut. Her father had been gone since 1979. He had written her name on this envelope sometime before that. He had latched the can, locked the door, handed her the key, and made her swear. Then he had gone home and died of the cancer the VA had spent 6 years pretending was not from any of the places he had been. Elena sat down on the dinette bench. The vinyl crackled under her. She pulled the envelope toward her with the back of one finger, like she was afraid it might shatter. She slid her thumbnail under the flap. The dried glue gave without resistance. The letter inside was 3 pages long, written in pencil on lined notebook paper, the kind a soldier might have carried in a chest pocket. Her father's handwriting was the same as she remembered, all blocky capitals, the letters leaning slightly to the right like men walking into wind. She held the pages flat against the table and read. "Elena," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are in trouble. I always knew one or the other would come true, and probably both. I want you to know 3 things before you open the can. First, what is in the can is not a secret because I was ashamed. It is a secret because the people it concerns would have killed for it while I was alive and might still kill for it now. Second, what is in the can is yours and yours alone, by right of blood and by right of promise. Third, if you open the can you cannot unopen it, so sit a while and think, and when you are sure, then go ahead." Elena read the letter twice. She thought about her husband, who would have wanted her to wait. She thought about her son, who would have wanted her to open it that very second and damn the consequences. She thought about her father, who had died alone in a VA bed in Tacoma. She thought about the bank and the friendly man with the cartoonfish tie. Then she unlatched the can. Inside, on top, was a second envelope, smaller, sealed with red wax that had a thumbprint pressed into it. Beneath that envelope, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather-bound ledger. Beneath the ledger, in a velvet bag drawn shut with a black silk cord, was something heavy that clinked softly when she lifted the bag. Beneath the velvet bag, taking up the rest of the can, were stacked bundles of paper currency, each bundle banded in the brown paper of a bank long since closed. She did not count the bundles. She did not open the velvet bag. She did not break the wax seal on the smaller envelope. She set everything back in the can in the order she had found it, closed the lid, and latched it. Then she sat in the dinette with her hands flat on the table and waited for her heart to slow. A truck came up the lane around noon. She slid the ammunition can under the bench and sat with her ankles crossed like a woman expecting company at a tea social. A polite knock. A man's voice, gentle, asking if anyone was home. She opened the door a crack. He was about 60, weathered in a clean denim shirt and a Vietnam veteran's ball cap. He took the cap off when he saw her. He said his name was Levi Marsh, and he ran the small engine repair out on County 14, and he had heard that Holly's Whitfield's girl had been moved out to the old trailer. She studied his face. He had her father's habit of looking just past your right shoulder when he spoke, like he was checking the tree line. She asked how he had known her father. He said he had not exactly, but his own father had served with Hollies in Korea and had spoken of him every Christmas Eve until the day he died. Alina found that she believed him. She invited him in. He stepped up carefully. He looked around once, slowly, the way a man does when he is used to rooms where staring gets people hurt. He said the bank crew had been at the house already. He had stopped them long enough to grab 3 things he thought she would want. He went out and came back with her husband's leather tool belt, a wooden cigar box that held the small things from the top of her dresser, and the framed photograph of her son. She had to sit down. Levi pretended not to notice. He asked if she had eaten, and when she did not answer, he said he had a thermos of coffee and a sack of biscuits in the truck. She said yes. She said she did not know how to repay him. He said his father had told him a long time ago that some debts skip a generation, and the only thing to do is pay them when they come due. While he was gone, Alina pulled the ammunition can from under the bench. She thought of her father's letter, the sentence about people who would have killed for what was inside. She thought of how easy it would be, out here, for a woman of 81 to disappear, and for a trailer to burn to its rims by morning. She slid the can back under the bench and covered it with rotted gingham. When Levi came back, she did not say one word about the can or the letter. He left at 1 in the afternoon and said he would come back at sundown with a kerosene lamp and a folding cot and a jug of clean water. She said yes. For 3 days, nothing happened that had not happened in the first hour. Levi came at sundown with the lamp and the cot. He came back at sunup with a thermos. He fixed the broken step. He swept the wasps from under the awning. He hung a tarp over the stove-in corner of the bathroom roof. He did not come inside unless she invited him. On the 3rd day, he brought a small pot of yellow chrysanthemums and set them on the cinder-block step without saying anything about them. Alina watched him from the dinette window and felt something old and rusted in her own chest start to give the way the lock on the door had given, slow and reluctant, with a sound like a small bone breaking. On the 3rd night, she opened the smaller envelope. She did it after Levi had gone, with the kerosene lamp turned low, and she broke the wax seal with her thumbnail the way she had broken the larger flap. Inside was a single sheet of onion skin paper and a smaller scrap that had been folded so many times the creases were nearly cuts. The onion skin was a typed letter on the letterhead of a law firm in Seattle, dated 1978, addressed to her father. It informed him that the matter he had brought to the firm's attention had been investigated to the extent the firm was able, and that the conclusions reached were as follows. There were 3 numbered paragraphs. The first concerned a shipment of bullion, The second concerned a payroll officer named Crane. The third concerned a man whose name had been redacted by her father with a heavy pencil bar. The letter ended by recommending that her father pursue no further action through the firm, and that he secure the materials in his possession in a place known to no one but a single trusted heir. The scrap paper was a hand-drawn map. Elinor sat very still and did not breathe for a long time. The chrysanthemums on the step rattled in a small wind. The lamp guttered. She folded the onion skin back into the envelope and the map back into the envelope and pressed the broken seal flat with her thumb, and she said out loud, to no one, "Well, Daddy." Well, she did not sleep that night. By dawn she had decided. She would ask Levi in the morning whether he had any reason to know the name Crane. She would watch his face when she said it. If his face stayed the way it had been all 3 days, she would tell him about the can. If his face changed, even by the width of a hair, she would walk into town that afternoon and find a lawyer and a locksmith and a bank with a vault. She had survived 81 years by being patient and by being a little bit afraid of everything, all the time, in a quiet way that did not show on her face. Levi came at sunup with the thermos. He set it on the dinette. He sat down across from her. She poured for both of them. She let him take a sip. Then she said, "Levi, did your father ever mention a man named Crane?" Levi set his cup down very slowly. He looked at her for a long second. Then he looked just past her right shoulder, at the tree line outside the gingham window, and he said, "Ma'am, my father told me on his deathbed that if a Whitfield ever asked me about a man named Crane, I was to tell the Whitfield 3 things, and then I was to do whatever the Whitfield asked of me until the day I died." Elinor put her cup down too. She said, "What are the 3 things?" Levi told her. The 3 things took about 4 minutes to say. When he was done, Elinor stood up and walked to the dinette bench and pulled the ammunition can out from under it and set it on the table between them. She said, "All right, son. I am asking." The first thing Levi said was that his father had been the supply clerk in a mountain bivouac in the winter of 1951, and that a payroll shipment, intended for 3 regiments and consisting of currency and a quantity of gold meant for a Korean liaison fund, had gone missing during a Chinese push that overran the bivouac for 9 hours before being repulsed. The second thing Levi said was that an officer named Crane had been the only American above the rank of corporal to walk out of that bivouac alive, and that Crane had been promoted twice and decorated once, and had retired in 1968 to a ranch outside Yakima, where he had raised quarter horses and died of natural causes in 1989. The third thing Levi said was that Crane had taken the gold and the currency, and that Hollis Whitfield, who had been on patrol elsewhere when the bivouac fell, had spent the next 28 years quietly assembling proof, and that the proof and a portion of the recovered shipment were, his father believed, hidden somewhere only Hollis's daughter would ever find them. Elinor opened the can. She took out the bundles of currency first and stacked them on the dinette. There were 41 bundles. Each bundle was banded in brown paper and stamped with the seal of a bank that had failed in 1983. She did not count the bills. She set them aside. She took out the velvet bag and loosened the silk cord. Inside were 11 coins, each the size of a silver dollar, each stamped with a Korean character on one side and an eagle on the other. They were not silver. They were the soft, heavy yellow of a metal that does not corrode in any climate. Levi made a small sound in his throat. Elinor set the bag beside the bundles. She took out the leather ledger and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was her father's. The dates ran from January of 1952 to October of 1978. Each page was a record of a transaction, an observation, a witness statement, an address, a phone number, a photograph clipped to the page with a brass paper fastener. The ledger was not a treasure map. The ledger was a case file. Her father had spent 26 years building the case against Crane, and the men who had paid Crane to look the other way, and the men who had paid those men. The ledger named 17 people. 11 of them were dead. 6 were not. Eleanor closed the ledger. She closed her eyes. She thought about what her father had wanted. He had not wanted the gold. He had not wanted the currency, or he would have spent some of it, and he had died with $211 in his checking account. He had wanted the case. He had wanted somebody, someday, to take the ledger to somebody who could do something with it. He had handed it to her because she was the only person he trusted, and he had made her wait 50 years because the men in the ledger had been powerful, and because waiting, sometimes, is the only weapon a poor man has. Eleanor opened her eyes. She looked at Levi. She said, "Son, I am going to need a lawyer who does not scare easy, and a reporter who does not lie, and a place to keep this that is not this trailer." Levi said, "Ma'am, I have all three, and I have had them ready for 41 years. If you have made it this far, do me a favor, tap like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments whether your own father left you anything you did not understand until you were old." Now back to Eleanor. The lawyer's name was Maddox, and she practiced out of a converted feed store in a town called Republic, 4 hours northeast across the Cascades. Levi drove. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat with the ammunition, Ken on her lap wrapped in a quilt his mother had pieced in 1962. Eleanor had never been east of Spokane in her life. She watched the pines turn into firs, and the firs turn into larches, and the larches turn into juniper and sage. She thought about her husband, who had wanted to take her to the ocean on their 40th anniversary and had not lived to. She thought about how a life is mostly the trips you do not take, and how, sometimes, very late you take one. Maddox was 42 and built like a fence post, and had a daughter in the 2nd grade, whose drawings were tacked to every flat surface in the office. She listened to Eleanor for 2 hours without interrupting once. She read the letter and she read the onion skin, and she paged through the ledger with a pair of cotton gloves. She pulled from a desk drawer like a woman who had been waiting for a ledger of exactly this kind. When she was done, she took her glasses off and set them on the desk and said, "Mrs. Whitfield, what your father built here is the cleanest case I have ever seen against people who, 20 years ago, could have had me killed for looking at it sideways. Some of those people are still alive. Most of them are very old now. Old men get scared. Scared men talk. I would like your permission to take this to a federal prosecutor I trust in Spokane, on the condition that you and Mr. Marsh stay somewhere safe for the next 3 weeks." Eleanor said, "All right." Maddox said, "Good." Then Maddox said one more thing. She said, "Ma'am, there is a federal statute about recovered military gold and a finder's percentage that has not been claimed in this case in 75 years. If we do this right, you will never need to worry about a bank or a friendly man with a fish tie again." Eleanor did not cry. She had used up her crying. But she did, finally, allow herself to laugh. They stayed 3 weeks in a fishing cabin on a lake whose name Levi made her promise to forget. The cabin belonged to Maddox's uncle, a retired game warden who left a casserole in the refrigerator and a note that said the rifle in the closet was loaded, and the dog under the porch was friendly to people he liked. The dog's name was Hap. He slept across her feet every night and growled at the door at 2 in the morning every other night, but the door never opened. Levi slept in the bunkhouse. He came up at dawn with a thermos and at dusk with a fishing rod. He taught her to cast for trout. She caught 4 in 3 weeks. They did not talk about the ledger. They talked about her husband and his wife who had died in 1991, and her son, and his son who was a long-haul trucker in Montana. They sat on the porch and watched the loons, and they did not, for the first time in their lives, feel like they were waiting for the next bad thing. On the 19th day, the phone in the cabin rang. It was Maddox. The federal prosecutor had moved fast. 3 men had been served. 2 had agreed to cooperate before lunch. 1 had asked for a lawyer and then, by morning, agreed to cooperate too. The estate of Officer Crane, which had passed to a grandson who managed a chain of car washes in Bakersfield, had been frozen pending a civil action. The federal finder's statute was being invoked on Aliner's behalf. The recovered shipment, plus interest, was being valued by a panel of 3 appraisers in Denver. Maddox would not give a number on the phone. She said the number was the kind of number you tell a person while looking them in the eye, in a room with a door that closes. Aliner and Levi packed the truck. Hap rode between them with his head out the window. They drove west into the sun. Aliner did not move back to the house in town. The house had been auctioned and bought by a young couple expecting their first child, and Aliner said leave them alone. A house should belong to people who are starting and not to people who are ending. She moved instead into a small clapboard cottage at the edge of Republic, 2 streets from Maddox's office. The woman who sold it to her had been a teacher for 40 years and asked Aliner to please leave the lilac bush by the back door because her late husband had planted it. Aliner promised. She kept the promise. The lilac bloomed every May for the rest of her life. Levi rented the bungalow next door. They had supper together most nights and breakfast together never, because she liked her mornings quiet and he respected that, and because at their age the shape of love is not always the shape the songs describe. The federal action took 3 years to fully resolve. 6 surviving men pled guilty to a tangle of charges that included conspiracy, theft of government property, obstruction, and, in 2 cases, an old murder that had been called an accident in 1953. Aliner's finder's percentage came to a number that Maddox did, in fact, tell her in a closed room while looking her in the eye. Aliner put a hand on the desk, and she put her other hand on her chest, and she said, Maddox, that is enough money for me to do every single thing I ever thought of doing, and a few things I never had the nerve to think of. Maddox said, yes, ma'am, it is. Aliner said, then I had better start thinking. The first thing she did was set up a trust in her father's name to assist veterans who had been put out of their homes. Within 5 years, it had helped 4,000 veterans across 9 states. The second thing she did was buy back the strip of red dirt where the Airstream sat, plus the 20 acres around it, and put the deed in Levi's name with a clause that the land could never be sold to a developer. The Airstream was repaired by a man in Walla Walla. He restored the aluminum skin to the soft, polished gleam it had worn when her father drove it off the lot in 1956. Inside, he kept the green vinyl dinette exactly as it had been. Aliner visited the trailer twice a year, in May for the lilacs and in October for the larches. She slept on the bunk. She made coffee on the 2-burner stove. She had everything more than that, finally, because her father had asked her to keep a promise, and she had kept it. The deputy who had driven her out on the morning of the eviction came to visit once, 2 years in. He had retired by then. Aliner made him coffee on the 2-burner stove, and they talked about his grandmother in Bellingham. He cried once briefly when she handed him an envelope and told him to give it to a charity of his grandmother's name. He said, ma'am, I do not know how to thank you. She said, son, you drove me out here on the worst morning of my life, and you turned off the radio when the song got cruel, and you do not owe me one thing. He left at dusk. The pines closed behind him. Aliner lived to be 91. She died in the clapboard cottage in Republic on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, with the lilac just starting to bud outside the back door. Levi was beside her. Hap was across her feet. Maddox was in the kitchen making tea. The last thing Aliner said was the word Daddy, said quietly, like a question being asked and answered in the same breath. She was buried beside her husband and her son under a stone that gave her dates and her father's regiment, and one line beneath them she had chosen herself. The line read, "She kept the promise." The trust still runs. The Airstream still sits on its strip of red dirt, polished and waiting, and on the dinette table there is a steel ammunition can painted olive drab, empty now, lid latched, and beside it a yellowed envelope with a name written across the front in blocky pencil hand. The name is not a leaner. The name is yours if you ever need it. That is what she would have wanted you to know.